Welcome back, everyone, to a brand new episode of the Crypto Muay Thai Podcast. I am very excited to introduce our special guest today, Chad Barraford. He is the technical lead at one of the hottest and more interesting projects, at least in my particular opinion, THORChain. So I'm incredibly happy to welcome him to the podcast. How are you doing today, Chad?
Good. Thanks for having me on.
It is my pleasure. It is my pleasure. So very quickly, sort of how we always kick it off here, just give the quick 90-second or 2-minute background on yourself, if possible, and kind of how you found your way into this wild world of digital assets.
For me, I was just kind of working for a Boston startup, and I just wanted to kind of expand my own experience. So I decided to start traveling the world. And I went to Croatia. I met these couple guys who are big crypto fans, big ETH bulls. And they started talking to me about crypto and like what crypto was and blockchain, what blockchain is, all this kind of stuff. So I was like really kind of like just fascinated completely by it. And so I really wanted to understand what blockchain actually is underneath the hood. So I actually started to write blockchains from scratch, just to kind of like understand how it actually works. If you want to know how something works, best thing to do is just build it yourself from scratch. You'll learn a lot as part of that process. And ever since then, I've just been, messing about, trying to figure out how this industry is, where it's moving to, how I can contribute, how I can help mature this like infant baby that we have of crypto that's just like so young and so that needs so much infrastructure and other things to help it manifest into a more mainstream kind of way. And so I met these guys, learned about crypto. That was about 4 years ago. Or 3 years ago, something like that. And ever since then, I've just been like reading everything I can read and doing everything I can do.
Gotcha. So it sounds normal, like how people, well, not that particular path, but kind of like the genesis where you get introduced and then you're like, oh, this touches on a lot of different things that I really, really like. And then you just gradually start going layer and layer down the rabbit hole, for yourself. So I can't remember. Obviously, you've got a technical background. So whenever you're first introduced to Ethereum, like what was it that made you that took you on this particular path? So Ethereum, and then kind of what you're building now with THORChain. There's similarities, but there's a lot of differences as well. So what was some of the first like things you got your feet wet with, so to speak, like within Ethereum? And then how did that gradually like form your opinion as to be sort of like make the transition to one of the founding members of this new project, which again is similar but different in a lot of different ways as well?
Yeah, and I found Ethereum to be just conceptually so interesting, right? The idea that you can write a little bit of business logic and then deploy that onto a blockchain very easily, very simply, and be able to have millions of people using it or millions of dollars being passed through it or any of these things. That is a really, truly impressive technology that really expands upon and lowers the bar for an engineer like myself, for example, to go from zero to something functional, practically in a weekend, more or less. And that's very impressive. I didn't get too deep into the Ethereum like development world because it just felt too new to me back then. Like it hadn't quite matured. Like the dev tools weren't quite there. Like the test environment wasn't quite like there yet. And so I started looking into like other things. I started working with like Lightning Network, for example, and making some contributions there, and just diving into other aspects.
Got you.
I built a startup around like building blockchain gaming, for example, and I did that for a little while. I just kind of figured out where is this world moving to, where the benefits lie, and how can I contribute to all that?
Got you. That's really, really interesting. So, and that makes sense from your background perspective as well. So you did that. You dabbled in a couple different things. How did you get connected, with the founding team of THORChain? Were y'all went to university together, or was it just sort of another just random Nexus type thing?
It's actually funny. Like I was looking for a job like a year ago, maybe a year and a half now, somewhere in there, and I came across this blockchain company called Sky Network. They're looking for a CTO, and the CEO there and one of the advisors there were flying out to Berlin. That's where I was living at the time, and they were flying out to Berlin for this like Cosmos hackathon, right? And so they're like, "Hey, come up to hackathon with us. Hack with us for a couple of days in this hackathon. We'll check out, get to meet each other, get to know each other. We'll see your skills, so forth and so on." It ended up being like kind of like a job interview, so to speak. And so the advisor and myself, we started working together to build out like kind of a simplistic implementation of what THORChain would eventually become, right? And so we actually committed the first lines of code at that hackathon. We ended up winning the hackathon, and we won a bunch of Cosmos Atom tokens, which is cool. And so they like, "Oh, you're pretty good. We like you, blah, blah, blah. We'll hire you for this CTO job for Sky Network," which I took for a few months before I left them and just went full time at THORChain. So I helped from the beginning. I was writing the first lines of code for THORChain as we see it today, and I was really fortunate to do so. It's been like one of the most amazing projects to work on like I've ever been. It's absolutely fantastic.
So for individuals that have been around like that story is not uncommon.
Yeah.
Where it's
couple
like
nerds meeting each other at a hackathon. It never happens, right? This is a very unique story.
Yeah, exactly. And then you fast forward a couple years, and Sergey and Larry are like, "Oh yeah," So it's a very it's a cool story whenever you get a chance to like hear that, but also at the same exact time, like the history still being written as we sort of speak. So with that, what is THORChain? So obviously I know a little bit about it, enough to be dangerous, but it's really doing something that quite frankly is really needed in the space, but it's also from a perspective that is outside the norm of currently what's going on in the space as well. So before we get into all of that, what is THORChain, and then just gradually just sort of walk us through, piece by piece what you guys are building.
Yeah, sure. So one way to look at it from a very simplistic perspective of what it is doing is like, it's like a Uniswap, but cross-chain, right? Now you can swap from Bitcoin to Ethereum to Tether to Ripple to Monero to whatever it is that you want to swap to. The network can theoretically connect with just about any blockchain in the world, right? So that's a really powerful thing in one sense, right? Because now you can actually bring chains like Bitcoin Cash or Bitcoin or Ripple into the DeFi space, which has never really been possible before for the most part, right? At least not in a way that to me makes any reasonable sense. But another way to look at it, this is kind of how I look at it, that we're building the highways of crypto, right? Because each individual chain, whether it be Bitcoin or Ethereum or whatever else, these like isolated kind of islands that exist onto themselves and have no connection or relationship to anything else out there in the blockchain crypto sphere, right? And so all of a sudden you have this thing called THORChain that comes along, and all of a sudden you can now move your tokens or your wealth or transactions or whatever you want to do from one chain to another chain. Predominantly we're focused at this moment of doing swapping, so swapping Ethereum for Bitcoin or what have you. But once we have those kind of pathways built, those highway, roads built between one chain to the next, all of a sudden this opened up the door to a new way of thinking about crypto that wasn't feasible or possible before. The only way you can move between one crypto asset to another crypto asset on another chain was going through some sort of centralized, service like Coinbase or Binance or one of these guys, which inherently comes with a whole host of really significant issues, right? For one, it's not decentralized. For two, you have to dox yourself and identify who you are. Give them your passport and your firstborn child, all these things you have to kind of give away. But all of a sudden, that won't be a requirement anymore. And now you can just move your Bitcoin into some other thing, Atom, sure, whatever you want, right? It's one of the benefits of THORChain is that it is an agnostic system. It doesn't really care about what chain you're using, what asset you're using. It doesn't pick winners and losers like Uniswap kind of does by just picking only Ethereum assets, right? It says, whatever you want to work with, you know what, we can work on it. And whatever chains of the network supports or assets of the network supports, it's not up to anybody but the community. The community can decide to add, we want to get Ripple support. Okay, then the community can decide to add that to the network onto themselves without requiring anybody like myself or anybody else from the team permission or any of this kind of stuff. It's really decentralization at its best from my perspective.
Got you. So I don't have a technical background, so I'm sure probably 80% of the listeners who are listening right now or watching will sort of, be from my similar mindset. But so give us the non-technical sort of explanation as to what is the sort of like sleek design for you to be able to accomplish this. Because for those who may not know, it's very difficult because you've got, just like you said, these isolated chains with different assets. And in order to sort of bridge them, it's not just like, oh, well, we'll just like bridge them. There's a technological sort of hurdle that needs to be crossed, which
For
to
sure.
date, the path of least resistance has been essentially creating a synthetic asset collateralized by a cross-chain asset without actually being able to swap the actual thing, which is what Thor is trying to solve right now. So what are the technical advancements, or what was the technical design that you guys sort of stumbled upon or knew straight from the jump that would allow you to kind of conquer this?
Yeah, so we're not doing pegged assets like you were describing of a pegged asset on Bitcoin, on Ethereum. To me, that's the wrong way of going at it in so many ways. It just adds more risk that is completely necessary. But from our perspective, we're just going from layer one to layer one, real assets, no synthetic weird things, just straight up layer one to layer one. Here you go. The difficulty came into, there's a lot of different reasons why it was difficult, but one of the kind of the last straws to break the camel's back, in a manner of speaking, was what we call threshold signatures. And that was a relatively new kind of cryptography innovation done by a research team recently. And so what that means is you can kind of think of threshold signatures as very similar to like a multi-sig, right? And if you're listening from the multi-sig, it's like, me and you, your brother and my brother, all have private keys, and we need 3 or 4 of us, 3 out of the 4, to write a transaction to move some Bitcoin from our wallet to some other location. It requires a consensus between the 4 of us to say, okay, we're going to move 1 Bitcoin from our wallet to some other wallet, right? And the problem with multi-sig is that it's not all supported by every chain, and different chains support it in different ways. So for example, Bitcoin only supports 20 signatures in a one signature, like moving one transaction, right? So that means that you could only have up to effectively 20 people, right, to be able to in a decentralized way control the funds on that Bitcoin wallet, right? It's a limiting factor that you really can't get really significant decentralization, right? But threshold signature is different. Whereas in multi-sig, each person is developing their own individual signature, right? And threshold signatures, the 4 of you or the 3 of you are coming together to create a single signature, right? And that can function on any chain in the world, right? It doesn't require a chain to support multi-sig, doesn't require a chain to have this, that, and the other thing. You now have a universal way that works across every chain, and you can have as many signers as you want, 20, 30, 40, however many you want to put into that group. You can now do that in a way that is universal with every single chain out there. And that was one of the last kind of difficult things we needed to address. But even threshold signature has its own problems, because the more people you have involved with a threshold signature, the more individuals, the more party members, the time it takes to do a signature increases, right? It's a quadratic kind of increase, or exponential kind of increase, right? So if you have 20 people signing for something and you start using a threshold signature, it could take about 1.5 minutes, 2 minutes for one signature to happen, right? And that's a problem, right? Because all of a sudden, you have a wallet that has some funds, but you'll only send out like 1 transaction every 2 minutes. And that's like, whoa, that's real slow, right? That's a kind of to think about it. But we've solved that problem in another way, using kind of more of like a hot wallet, so to speak, that can do transactions, real fast. Theoretically, the limit is basically on the chain itself, which is the remote chain, I mean. So you can sign as many as you wanted, and that using that kind of medium. So that was one of the difficult things at the end that was solved by a recent research team. There are other things about like dealing with the intricacies of each individual chain, right? Because if you're creating a decentralized exchange, those kind of edge points, those kind of weird events that happen, like reorgs, for example, on Bitcoin, adds a lot of complexity, And while centralized exchanges don't really, for the most part, don't really code for those reorg attacks that may happen, they kind of just swallow the money they may lose. THORChain has to do everything in a completely automated way. All the node operators that run nodes, they're not, clicking in their computers, clicking things all day. They just build nodes and then they just run on their own. They don't touch or do anything. The complete system runs completely autonomously without anybody actually involved. We're completely removing the human element as much as humanly possible. And that's like a really important thing to do as well. Most people haven't even figured out how to do that in many respects.
Okay. All right. That makes sense conceptually. And I can see, and I've been one of, I'm far from a huge proponent that people listen to, but the layers of complexity that continues to sort of like get toppled on within, other layer one networks, principally being Ethereum, given, it's got the primary market share. 100%, like you can see how eventually there can be bad outcomes whenever you layer additional complexity on top of complexity. So anytime that there's a very simple path like you guys are exploring, that's always going to be one of the areas of least resistance, because there's less sort of fault or failure point, so to speak.
Right. I mean, you have to remember that like a centralized exchange, for the most part, will have a multi-sig wallet held by a few individuals at the very top of the company, right? Usually like 3 or 4 people, most commonly. And they have access to basically like 90% of all the funds, which is just like mind-blowing to think about. It's mind-blowing. But now THORChain has figured out a way to have the ownership of that massive wallet, which currently right now has about $20 million in it, or 30 million, I think it's $30 million actually. $30 million of like actual real tokens and real value held by currently 36 different individual anonymous people, right? They're actually all have control of those funds, but nobody can steal those funds in the way it's designed, right? That was one of the big kind of innovations of THORChain. It's like, how do you get anonymous individuals to control a huge amount of funds without anybody being able to steal any of the funds in a reasonable way? And we have effectively done that. We've decentralized exchanges in a way that was never possible or viable before.
Got you. So with that, you sort of touched on a little bit there, security of funds, but were there any additional considerations or sleek features that you had to input for security of the chain as well? So typically, if go ahead, I'll just let you
absolutely. No, you're absolutely right. So THORChain has a token of its own, which is called the RUNE coin, which anybody can buy through various exchanges or whatever. But that token is not just like a random token thrown on top of a swapping system like you see in Uniswap or Sushi Swap or one of these things. It actually has value and purpose beyond that, right? Its actual purpose predominantly is around securing the chain, right? So it ensures that the people running the network, the node operators of the network, have enough money at stake, right? That they bond into the network. They have enough money that if something were to happen and funds were stolen, it would hurt them more than it would the people who like are using the network to either put the liquidity provider in, like, putting up your own money into the network to use as liquidity. And so even if your funds are stolen, the network actually steals back from the individual who stole it to refund back to the network, back to solvency. And actually, technically speaking, it actually funds back more money than was stolen. So it actually improves the network's liquidity rather than takes from it, which is kind of counterintuitive, but that's how it works. That was a pretty interesting way of approaching it.
Okay, that's the first time I've ever heard anything about that. My mind is kind of wrapping around it a little bit, but I think I understand the general strokes of it as well, which is interesting. So one of the things that were sort of talked about prior from the utility token that you guys have, RUNE, RUNE, is that it helps the network sort of scale with it. And in general, like kind of how you described it, that makes sense that as the network grows, that's how more and more value kind of is attributed to that particular token as well, if I'm understanding it correctly.
Yeah, sure. The RUNE itself, its value which one thing that's interesting about RUNE is that it's not a speculative asset in the traditional sense. People can speculate all day what Bitcoin's value is, what Ethereum's value is, all that's well and good. But RUNE is a little bit different in terms of how it's designed. Its value is derived specifically from the staked assets on the network, right? The non-RUNE staked assets. So you can come up to THORChain and say, okay, I'm going to stake into the BNB pool or the Bitcoin pool or whatever it might be, and you can stake your assets there. And it ensures that the value of so you put in $1,000 of Bitcoin and you put $1,000 of RUNE to equal each other into the pool. That means that this is equal to that, and therefore the value of RUNE is connected to that Bitcoin that you put it in a sense, right? And so the network is designed that 1/3 of the circulating supply of RUNE should be placed into the liquidity as a liquidity provider would. And the other 2/3 is used by the validators of the network, the bonders of the network, to bond up and use as collateral for the security of the network and making sure that the funds are secure, right? So as people stake more money into the network, the value of RUNE inherently goes up. And you don't see that with, a uni token or anything like this. There's a disconnection between the use of the network and the actual, the coin itself, in a matter of speaking. But RUNE is actually directly relational to people staking or unstaking or adding more liquidity to the network. That's a really interesting different change. It kind of makes it, in a sense, makes RUNE like an ETF, sort of, right? Because as Bitcoin increases in value, so does RUNE, right? Proportionally to how much of the Bitcoin is in the THORChain network, right? Same thing with Ethereum, same thing with Ripple, same thing with, Binance token or whatever else you got in mind. All those tokens, as they go up in value or down in value, will inherently push and pull on the price of RUNE with it. And that's a very interesting kind of difference of how this network works and what you see out there today.
Gotcha. And I think, from my perspective as an investor, that's something that is easier to wrap your head around. So there's always going to be forward-looking. So asset markets inherently are forward-looking, meaning, say you got $30 million locked in RUNE right now in the THORChain. The value of RUNE, the total market cap, should be approximately $30 million. It's not like that. I didn't check your price today, but I know it's more than that. So there's always going to be, forward-looking estimates, not about what you have today, but what they expect to be locked up within the ecosystem 1 year, 2 year, 3 years down the line. But that is very simple math. If you can have a predictable multiplier, knowing that at least 50%, or let's just say majority of the value, is going to be tied to the value that's going to the network. And then after a handful of years, you can gradually start to build out those projections and expectations, which will inherently be incorrect, but it's an easier way for people to wrap their minds around, or wrap traditional methodologies of value investments into this, versus, again, what you were talking about prior, where Bitcoin and Ethereum, people still have debates today as to how you value it. And the best it is it's worth what someone else is willing to pay for it, is the best way that you can possibly approximate it, despite all the new fancy metrics and fundamental insights and all that sort of stuff.
Sure. Yeah. And RUNE's a little bit different. It's more about what people are willing to pay for all the other assets rather than RUNE itself, in a sense.
Totally. So you mentioned that you have 30 million staked in the ecosystem right now.
Total value lock. Yeah.
Okay. Total value. So do you know, where primarily those are coming from? Not individuals or anything, meaning, are you getting more institutional interest, more retail interest, or because it is, very decentralized, or fulfilling the promise of decentralization without, again, needing to dox yourself to be able to participate? Do you have no idea?
We don't really have much of an idea. All we know about is our people we talk to directly, right? Investors and firms and this kind of stuff that we have relationships with, that the team has relationships with. And so we have conversations with them, and many of them are either running in a node, or they're speaking to the network, or pooled into the network. But generally speaking, we have no idea who anybody is. And so when we have no idea, and all the information about who is put assets into the network and who is not, is technically public information. You can pull it right from our servers, right from the network itself. How much people are staked, how much people are putting into the network, all that stuff is public information in a sense, but nobody knows who anybody is. And it has that anonymity thing. I think there is going to be an intent that something like this will attract institutional investors more so than previous kind of similar networks. I think the reason why that is because according to a economic review by Gauntlet, and Gauntlet's the same one that did an economic review of Uniswap V2, they're saying that the average swap fee will be 1/3 where it typically is for Uniswap, and yet the network will produce approximately 10x the revenue that something like Uniswap. And it's all because of how we're using a CLP or continuous liquidity pool mechanism for how we charge for fees versus an XY key 30 basis points of what Uniswap is currently doing. And so it effectively means that people will pay in fees whatever they choose to pay, right? And some people are willing to be paying high in fees. Like there was a guy, somebody or girl, I have no idea who they are obviously, but somebody passed through $30,000 of RUNE in a single swapping transaction and paid $500 in fee, right? Because for whatever reason, they were in a rush to buy a lot of RUNE, okay? And they thought it was worth it to spend the $500 in fees that they spent to do that. Their choice, they made a choice for that. And that $500 goes to the liquidity providers that put into that pool, you know? So with having a more reliable income stream that I think THORChain will have, and having better rewards, we actually have block rewards, for example, whereas I don't think Uniswap does, at least maybe they do now, but it didn't before. Will attract institutional investors to be able to put, their 1 million, 10 million, 30 million, whatever money they have into this network. It's just a network that's properly decentralized and can give them a more reliable income on that money rather than pushing something like, Sushi Swap, which, who knows what's going to happen with that 6 months from now, right? They kind of, who knows if it's a firework, a flash in the pan or not, time will tell. I don't have a crystal ball to read into, but I think the economic design of THORChain is really well thought through, and the economic model makes much more sense and will produce better income and revenue for anybody who's staking into the network.
Gotcha. So there are staking rewards for THORChain.
Oh, for sure. Yeah. So there's actually two reward systems for that. One is you make money. You make money if you put some I'm using the word stake, and I really shouldn't be using the word stake. That's slightly misleading. But like when you take your RUNE and your Bitcoin, for example, and you put it into the network as a liquidity provider, you're effectively buying a percentage of the pool, right? And any income that pool makes, you have that percentage of that income, right? So every time somebody swaps, from RUNE to Bitcoin, let's say, or Bitcoin to RUNE or whatever, a little bit of that transaction is left in the pool behind, and that income goes, into your wallet more or less, right? That's one way how it generates income. And as I was saying earlier, Gauntlet is saying that the revenues should be relatively much higher than what we've seen on something like Sushi Swap or Uniswap. The other way you actually make income, which is really interesting, is that we actually make block rewards as well. So every 5 seconds, the network actually just has a reserve of, it's like a huge amount of RUNE. Right now, it's only like, I think it's like 9 or 10 million RUNE, not that much. The intended amount will be like 220 or 200 million RUNE, somewhere around that area. And that every 5 seconds, a bunch of RUNEs is dumped in each and every pool, depending upon its usage or how much in demand that pool is, right? So every 5 seconds, you have a bunch of RUNE that gets dumped in the pool, which kind of makes the balance between RUNE and Bitcoin to be slightly off, right? A little bit too much RUNE. But the inherent thing that happen there is that people will swap Bitcoin into the network to arb that pool, to level it back out again. And that means that Bitcoin is constantly being sucked into the network like a vacuum cleaner, just constantly pulling liquidity out of the markets and into THORChain's network, just naturally through the economic systems of the design. And so you're just making money through swaps that's happening and arbitrage swaps that are happening. And then you're also making money by block rewards, just dumping more and more RUNE into your pool. All those things together should yield a very high reward for your investment.
Okay, I follow that logic 100%, and I can see why the Gauntlet analysis. So that Gauntlet did of you guys would sort of root out that this particular economic system is way more straightforward and potentially going to be far more lucrative than some of the existing ones that are there kind of now.
Yeah, absolutely. You can almost imagine, if you look at the different equations or algorithms that were used to figure out what the fee is in doing a swap like this, you can almost see it as like an evolution that was happening from, I think, Hayden created the first Uniswap. I think it was like 2 years ago, something like that, maybe 3, somewhere around there. And you can almost see like each iteration, even Hayden's algorithm he uses now is not the same as it was in V1. V1 was different than how they're using it in V2. But we're using a very differently designed using our CLP model, which just yields better fees for the network as a whole. Meanwhile, keeping the fees lower than that you would see on Uniswap, which is counterintuitive to think about, but that's literally how it works. And you don't even take my word for it. You can actually look it up on THORChain.net, right, which is a community-built kind of block explorer, if you want to call it that. And you can actually see what the average fee is, right, in terms of basis points. The BNB pool, for example, is lower than 30 basis points. I think it was like 0.2 or something like this, about 20 basis points or something like that. That's when I looked at it. So it's actually people are paying less in fees on that pool. Meanwhile, a pool that's illiquid, that has less liquidity passing through it, like Trust Wallet token, for example, has a much higher fee to it. People are willing to pay those fees. Like that's really what people are willing to pay to be able to swap from Trust Wallet token to RUNE or to BNB or whatever asset they're trying to get to. The system is different, and you can actually break up your transaction to smaller transactions over a longer period of time to be able to swap from Bitcoin to Ethereum with even less fees. You pick in the end effectively how much you want to pay in fees. It all depends upon how much time you have. If you're in a rush and you want to do it all like right now, then you'll pay higher in fees. It rewards people for patience and takes money from people who are impatient effectively. And that money that it gets generated goes to the network, goes to the community. It doesn't go to us as a team. It doesn't go to any individuals particularly. It goes to the entire network, and the complete ownership of that network is the community itself.
So, I mean, it's dynamic pricing. That's what you're talking about.
Yeah, it's another way of looking at it. It's dynamic pricing in a sense. And if you're willing to break up your transaction to smaller amounts over a longer period of time, you will pay less in fees. If you want to do that, go for it. If you want to get your Bitcoin now, then pay more in fees. Up to you.
Okay. That makes total sense. So super interesting. I'm super interested. Let's do walk me through like just the life of it or a customer persona, so to speak. So it's like, I want to go in and convert my Bitcoin to Ethereum, and because of everything that you told me, I want to do it on THORChain versus maybe wrapping it and doing wrap BTC and then transferring it over to the Ethereum network. So walk me through that. How do I plug in? What wallet do I need? And and take me through the process from how you see it.
Yeah, sure. So right now we've launched something we call ChaosNet about a month or two ago. I think it's 2 months ago, about that, somewhere around there. Okay. And ChaosNet, it was kind of the first implementation of real assets and real money. It only works with the Binance chain currently, so it's designed to work only with the Binance chain, just to prove the economics in a real world case, in a real world scenario, prove that it is actually secure. Because you can test all these things in your development environment, you can test all these things in a testnet environment, but you really, really don't know until you actually put it into the real world and you put real money on the line. And that's what we've done. We built a chain that can allow you to swap between BNB to other BEP2 assets on the Binance chain. So that's all that it supports today in its current implementation. But we will be launching a Bitcoin and Binance chain later this year, probably by the time of Christmas or so. We're aiming to get Ethereum done as well in that time period. I can't promise anything. You never know what's going to happen in this dev world. But we are actively working on, we actually have like 80% of Ethereum done. We are like probably 90% or 95% done on the Bitcoin implementation. We're actually rolling out a testnet with Binance and Bitcoin quite soon. And that's going to be a really nice thing for the community to start test an environment. Once we confirm that works and everything, we'll launch that probably later this year. And then you can swap from like Bitcoin to like, BNB, for example. And then maybe a month later-ish or so, we'll add Ethereum support to that network. Now, how you do it, as to your question of like, how do I actually exchange my Bitcoin for Ethereum? This is, I think, one of the great parts is that because it's a decentralized network, there's no specific way you have to do it, right? There's no specific UI that we control or anything like this. It doesn't really exist in the future of this network. The protocol that we've designed and built as a team doesn't really matter where you're coming in from, you know, a wallet that you have on your phone, or maybe somebody wants to build a web UI. There's a few people who are already working on that now, of a cross-chain web UI to swap from Bitcoin to Ethereum. I think it's called Asgard.exchange. I think it's, if I'm not mistaken, hope I'm right about that. But they're working on that now, actually. And so your wallet, say you have, you know, Trust Wallet maybe, or maybe you have, and what's another good wallet that you like?
MetaMask.
MetaMask. Maybe MetaMask can support in the future. Although I think we're actually funding a team that's actually building a cross-chain MetaMask. That's going to be so much better than MetaMask. So that MetaMask is great, and I'm actually a big fan of it. I actually met the creator of it. It's a great guy. But we're actually funding a team to help build a better MetaMask that works across-chain. But anyways, but yes, any wallet that you may have, you know, even including your ledger that you have on your you know, lock up in your safe or whatever. Could be used to do this. You can just, it's up to the wallet manufacturers to integrate to THORChain. And I think they will, because, you know, they want to be able to, you go to your wallet on your phone or whatever and say, okay, I have Ethereum and I want Bitcoin, right? Or whatever. And just be able to do that instantaneously within your wallet, without needing to go to some website, without needing to log into something, without needing to dox yourself, without needing to do anything. Just click, done. You have your Ethereum. You're up. Right. That's the kind of vision to make it as super simple as possible. And the network will support that no matter what wallet is. So people should get onto their wallet manufacturers, whoever that might be, you know, Exodus or whatever, to put pressure on them to start developing integration to THORChain, so they can swap from Bitcoin to Ethereum or to BNB or Ripple or Bitcoin Cash or whatever it might be.
Gotcha. Okay. That makes sense. And that's the grand vision to where I really see this sort of taking off. But it's interesting to see, like, needing to build the individual, like, connectivity points with the different chains. How are you going to prioritize that? So obviously, you know, you're with what are the larger three? So Bitcoin's almost done, Ethereum's almost done, Binance, you know, BNB is one of those ones. Is there, what's the goal? Is it to, you know, always connect to the top, I don't know, top 20, which continues to change a lot? Or is it just based principally upon, you know, demand that might be coming from the community saying, hey, we need to have interoperability with Cosmos or whatever else might come upon?
Yeah, sure. No, it's a good question to ask. This is one of the brilliant things about it. Is, like, it's not really up to us in a sense, right? And we can choose to work on, I don't know, Monero next, for example, right? Which has a lot of value and benefit to connecting Monero to a network like this, right? To add that privacy element would be nice. But anybody can build it, right? Anybody can contribute to the network. I mean, there's already teams out there. There's Polkadot, we're in talks with. They're building a Polkadot integration. Zilliqa is talking to us about building their own integration into our network. We have a team that is really excited about the product, and they're going to be working on the Cosmos implementation, right, to add Atom to the whole network. Anybody in the world can add an integration to XYZ chain or whatever it might be, and then just open a pull request. You know, we'll review it, make sure it's safe and secure and all those things, and then we'll pull it in. And then it's up to the community to decide, the node operator specifically decide what chains they do or do not want to support. Generally speaking, my assumption is that if you're a node operator, you're not really going to care what chain it is, because no matter what chain it is, it's just going to add liquidity to the THORChain network, which inherently pushes the price of RUNE up. And as a validator of the network, you want the value of RUNE to go right up, right? So even if you're like, say you're a person, you're like, I hate Ripple, for example, like you're a node operator and like, Ripple sucks. I'm not trying to hate on Ripple, so don't send me any hate mail on Twitter or whatever, you know, but like, just picking a random chain, say you hate Ripple for whatever reasons, but you're still going to want to add it to the network because it has access to, like, how much billions of dollars is Ripple right now? Like 2 billion, 3 billion? I can't remember the number, but like, that's a lot of money. It's billions of dollars that can be added to this network and to increase the value of RUNE. So as a node operator, you're like, hell yeah, Ripple, I fucking hate you, but whatever. It's just going to add more liquidity to the network and improve the value of RUNE. So who gives it? Who gives a shit, right? So it's up to the community to decide what chains they do and do not support. They can add chains, they can remove chains. But what's really important is that the team itself is not in control of that. We don't control what things get added, what things get removed, and that's really important. That's a really important thing because we don't want centralization to be able to dictate what is and is not an okay asset. We want the community to decide for themselves. But they may decide an asset to be like too insecure, for example. There's been ETC, for example, has had 51% attacks, 3 or 4 in the last month or so. So maybe that's not a good chain to be adding because it offers security risks in a way that could cause Bitcoin to be siphoned out of the network because that network is insecure, right? You might say that, make that argument, which is a valid argument to be made. Whether the community agrees with that statement, I'm not to say that's my statement personally, I'm just giving a random example that people might talk about, but like maybe they won't decide to add that network because of security related issues, right? Which is, maybe that's legitimate, right? It's up to the community to decide what chains to add. I think for us internally, in terms of the team, we want to get the biggest kind of guys first, right? Bitcoin, Ethereum, and Binance are massive. Once we have Bitcoin support, adding Bitcoin Cash or Litecoin or any other Bitcoin SV, any of these kind of Bitcoin forks becomes really easy because we already have the code for Bitcoin, and that code will probably work identically for Litecoin or Bitcoin Cash, right? So adding those chains will be, real quick, real easy. We'll bust those out real fast. But to add a chain like Solana, for example, which is a really interesting chain, they have a proof of history consensus algorithm, which is different than Bitcoin by a good margin in terms of how it's designed, how it functions. So that would take much more time to add. And maybe, the Solana team will want to, add their network to ours. Very well possible. Maybe, they would hire a team to build it for them. Who knows, right? But it's up to the community to decide what chains get added.
Got you. That makes total sense. So one of the things, and we've kind of been like talking about it whenever we're talking about adding different chains to the network, because ultimately it's accretive to the value of RUNE token. One of the things, whether just in straight tech businesses or even in protocols within the blockchain space, there typically needs to be some sort of like killer app that takes it to the next level, that attracts more and more capital, more and more people, users to the network, which ultimately it kind of becomes this reflexive, positive feedback loop. Obviously, Bitcoin in this year, more so than ever, has really proven that people believe in its store of value narrative. Ethereum,
Sure.
2 times, it's been in 2017, its ICO, its ability to sort of decentralize the fundraising process. And now in 2020, again, this sort of boom within DeFi, decentralized finance, has kind of taken hold. And that has allowed more Bitcoin to get sucked from, just holding it straight in Bitcoin, but onto the Ethereum network through a lot of these synthetic derivatives that you're talking about, which THORChain is looking to solve.
Right.
Do you think that you guys need a killer app to be able to sort of like juice the skids, or I won't call it a gimmick, but sort of like a flavor du jour where you're incentivizing participants now with yield farming or liquidity mining or anything like that to be able to kind of like grease the skids to start that positive reflexive loop? Or do you think that the value proposition in and of itself, or maybe some of the adjacent systems or businesses around it or demand for it is good enough, and this is just a far more efficient on-ramp and they'll choose it through that? Meaning, if I own Bitcoin and I want to participate in DeFi, say THORChain is 3 times faster than me needing to wrap my BTC or using the REM virtual machine, and I don't want to do that because I've got to pay a fee to do that and then unwrap it and all this other stuff. It's easier just to go through THORChain. If that's the case, do you think that is good enough? Kind of like talking about adjacent businesses, or do you think eventually the chain will need some kind of like killer app to really start that positive feedback mechanism?
Well, I mean, I would say just off the bat that like being able to exchange one coin to another coin across chain without any centralization, any censorship, no need for permission, any of these things, I think that's pretty killer app. That's pretty killer by itself. Just my 2 cents. But to answer your question though, I think THORChain is initial implementation of just doing swaps back and forth between chains is kind of the first application application of the technology underneath it, right? It's solved the kind of the significant difficult problem of like, how do we get a consensus of what happens across, you know, Bitcoin and Ethereum and Binance Chain, and have THORChain in the middle of it all, kind of holding that state and having an agreed consensus of like what's true and all these other remote chains. That by itself is like a major innovation that opens the door in a way that we haven't seen before, right? So if you take something like a compound finance, for example, right, which is on the Ethereum network, great smart contract, awesome. I use it myself. It's a really great service, right? But if you are now able to launch a compound finance-like application on something like a THORChain, where it's cross-chain, it's agnostic, it doesn't care about chains or assets or any of these things, it just treats them all effectively identically, you're now opening up that business logic to a much larger market, right? Much more than we can see on any DeFi application today. Because all of a sudden you have access to the, what is it, $250, $300 billion of Bitcoin, the 20 billion, 25, $30 billion of Ethereum, the whatever. All these things can be actually utilized in an app that is actually DeFi, that it actually is not centralized on a particular chain. It actually operates with any chain across the entire crypto sphere, right? That is like, you can have apps that have access to more liquidity than compound finance can reasonably have, or any other DeFi application on Ethereum for that matter, right? Building like DeFi on Ethereum to me is like, it doesn't make a whole lot of sense. Like, it makes sense if you look like a foot in front of your face of like, hey, this is a easy, quick way I can write some, 200 lines of code, which is like the average, smart contract size, and launch it on Ethereum and then like get some things going overnight. But if you want to build something that's fully featureful, that can actually connect more than just like a few assets on Ethereum, that takes a lot more time and it takes a lot more expense to do so. But it's a much powerful and much more flexible DeFi application by a landslide, right? So anybody who builds a compound finance in a decentralized way that doesn't require you to be on specifically one particular network will just kill a compound finance, right? And so THORChain is doing just the swapping concept first, but we have all sorts of plans down the road to be able to do something like a DAI, right, of a pegged token, right? But instead of being a pegged Ethereum-backed stable token, we can now do a Bitcoin-backed stable token, right? And you can, like, similar to DAI, you can 3x long Bitcoin using THORChain network. That's huge, right? And it doesn't have to be Bitcoin. It doesn't have to be Ethereum. It can be Ripple. It can be anything else. Like, who cares? It's all the same to THORChain, right? It doesn't matter. We're talking about being able to, like, allow people to stake funds into THORChain without moving your funds into the network, maintaining that your Bitcoin literally stays in your own wallet, in your own house, and never actually leaves your house, right? The idea of like staking, quote unquote, and having those funds to not leave your house has never been done before. And that's something we're actively looking into, like being able to do, right? And that's just keeping the security of your funds closer to home in a literal sense, right? That's like a killer app, right? By itself, like that would just change how people think about how they store their own funds, instead of pushing into a smart contract that like gets pwned 2 days later, which has happened in recent history. I think Yam was like that, if I'm not mistaken, right? And like now you're saying like I can make money on my Bitcoin, I can stack more sats without sending my Bitcoin somewhere else.
So
that is huge.
No, I think it's incredibly powerful. So you said two things that like really stand out to me. One is the building power. So whether it is your team creating these adjacent businesses on the chain or incentivizing other developers, whether you guys have grant programs sort of earmarked to be able to attract more and more devs, start building things on the network. Yes, it'll be slow moving at first, given we've mentioned it several times that Ethereum by and far has the dominant market share. But I think your long-term perspective or the possibility, the total addressable market, I agree with it, is far larger, because if you do build a compound or anything like that that needs to that has the ability to tap into multiple liquidity sources through multiple chains, that just expands the entire pie that much further and has the ability to sort of displant this dominant first mover advantage, which I posit, or in my opinion, is a lot stronger than what you would see normally in just a general tech type competition. So that I agree with that. And also with the ability to stake your assets on chain without actually having to put your assets on chain. That's one of the things that I've really been interested in recently, since I started looking at staking assets. So whenever you said that, it's like, okay, what about the ability to, put Tezos and on THORChain, but not actually have to move it, so you can still get your staking rewards for staking Tezos while still being able to have access to THORChain for whatever you may need to be. I don't know if that complexity still or that line of logic like still holds, but that ability to like quote unquote not give up that sovereignty of those assets, but potentially double dip through maybe even a compound like protocol that's being built on THORChain to lend out and get an additional yield. So now you've got your staking yield and you've got your lending yield. That's a killer app. So
I mean, theoretically speaking, what you could do like this, and this is something we're intending to do, is that you could put your assets onto THORChain, like into one of the pools, for example, and then take a loan out using your liquidity or your ownership of that pool as collateral to create like a token, right? Like a DAI, for example, like something conceptually similar to a DAI. So now you're making money on your initial investment, and then you have some dollars left over, so to speak, that you can then spend. You can go ahead and buy things. You can go ahead and transfer to your friends or whatever you want to do with it. And meanwhile, still make money on that original thing. Like that's pretty big unto itself, right? And that's something we're thinking about. We can actually extrapolate. And you can do that on a chain that's got 5-second block times, right? And it doesn't cost $10 or $15, whatever it is on Ethereum to send a transaction, right? It's like a super fast chain, 5 seconds per block. And you can send very cheaply, very quickly to be able to send, your funds to one person to another, or to move your funds around on THORChain, and having your assets on THORChain itself. Even being able to create a pegged. We could do this, and we're not sure if we're going to do this or not. We're talking about it internally, but creating like a pegged Bitcoin on THORChain itself, and then being able to transfer those things really fast. And that gives you basically gives you like a lightning network, in matter of speaking, on like running natively on THORChain. That might happen too. We're something we're talking about internally is something we want to kind of build on, right? But the fact that we have the chain kind of bridges set up, that's really kind of the hardest component of it. All these other features that you and I are now talking about, those are just like some business logic, right? A couple thousand lines of code or so. Versus like THORChain right now is like well over 100,000 lines or so. So like speaking, like we've already solved the difficult problem of like cross-chain connection, all that kind of stuff. So now the business logic of what you can do on THORChain, whether it be a compound finance-like thing, whether it be like a DAI-like thing, whether it be a Uniswap-like thing, that is relatively easy to build, right, than what we've already built in the past. So getting to that point of launching other like services like those onto THORChain, that bar it's not, relatively speaking, isn't that high.
Got you. So before I let you go, I'm just curious, what's the transaction costs on the network? So you talked about the speed, which obviously is way quicker than other competitors that are out there, maybe barring like Solana or something, which is specifically set up for speed. Yeah. But what are the transaction costs that you've seen, whether anecdotally or through testing or through live practice as well?
Yeah, so right now in Chaos now, it has no native assets, right? Even RUNE itself is not a native asset to THORChain. It actually sits on Binance's chain as a BEP2 asset. We're planning a migration from BEP2 asset to become a native asset on THORChain in this multi-chain launch that we're going to be doing later this year, right? The cost of what that costs in terms of a transaction fee when you're sending, from one wallet address to another wallet address, we're still trying to figure out what that is. But I think in the end, it'll be determined by the community of what they want that cost to be, right? I'm not sure what that is now, but what's interesting is that you're able to pay your gas on THORChain using any token that's on the THORChain network, right? So like, whereas on Ethereum right now, if you want to move, Tether on Ethereum, you need to pay your gas in Ethereum, right? So you need to hold Ethereum in order to move your Tether. But that's not going to be the same on THORChain because THORChain has the perfect price oracle built right into its core, right? So it always knows the exact price of Tether, the exact price of X, Y, and Z asset. And so because of that, we actually can figure out what the fee would be, do a little like tiny swap into, RUNE, and then the RUNE fee would be absorbed into the reserve probably, or we'll burn it. We're not sure quite yet. But like one of those two things. It'll be like probably like, I don't know, I'm going to guess like 10 cents or so, but don't hold me to that. It's actually not decided by me.
Nope.
Decided by the community at large.
Nope. Done said. Held to it. 10 cents. So you've heard it here. It's only 10 cents transaction fees on THORChain.
Well, the difference is that Ethereum, has really high gas costs right now because it can only do I think it's like 14 or 15 transactions per second, right? It's like double what Bitcoin is, right? Which is really not that many, right? And maybe Ethereum 2.0 would be a lot better with this kind of POW proof of stake like migration that they're talking about doing, and hopefully it will be, right? But because THORChain is a proof of stake network that's differently designed than Ethereum's, the number of transactions per second this network can do is far more. In fact, like the number of swaps THORChain can do is like more than every Bitcoin transaction, every Ethereum transaction, every Bitcoin Cash, Ripple, like the next like 9 chains combined. like it can do so many. It can do a lot of transactions per second. So they will unlikely be a limiting factor, at least for the next 3, 4, 5 years probably. Nothing that I'm concerned about anytime soon, but we'll probably revisit it in 5 years, something like this. But the number of transactions per second is much higher than we'd see on any of these chains, with the exception of EOS. EOS is like crazy fast, or Binance. Binance has like 11 nodes operating at 300 millisecond block times. But nonetheless, it's extremely fast, much more than the larger community even needs, to be honest with you. And it'll be able to transact things much cheaper, much quicker than anything we generally use today on Ethereum.
Incredible. This has been incredibly enlightening and illuminating for me. Is there anything that maybe you wanted to mention, or that you guys have coming up that you would like to mention before I let you carry on with the rest of your day?
Yeah, I mean, not much. We have a blog on Medium. People should check that out. I have a Twitter account at @Barraford, CBARAFORD. If anybody wants to follow me on there, I sometimes tweet every once in a long while. People check out ChaosNet, try it out, stake some, put some assets onto the network, do a few stops if you want to check it out, make some money if you want to, if you're into it. And we have multi-chain ChaosNet launching later this year, which will be, that's when you start to see Bitcoin integrations and other really important chains. That's where we're going to see a real shift in the ability and the culture of crypto in general.
Awesome. I can't wait, in all honesty. And it's not just bullshit either. I really found that this conversation.
Thanks for bullshitting me.
Yeah, I mean, I would, it's kind of my job, but in this particular case, like I knew about THORChain prior, had good enough, a 20,000 foot overview, sort of like an MBA understanding of THORChain, but. Yeah. And I was excited about it even then, but obviously talking with you and going a little bit deeper, obviously, keeping my head above water, I find it that much more interesting in what you guys are building. So I can't wait to see sort of like the process and how you continue to knock things off your milestone. But Chad, I really, really appreciate you taking time out of your schedule to have a conversation with me, educate the listeners, the viewers and stuff like that. And I can't wait to have you back on the podcast in a couple months down the road to be able to sort of look back in hindsight and say, yeah, we knocked that off. And this is the next thing that we're tackling, because it seems like you and the rest of the team really have a lot of momentum building behind you. So it'll be really, really fun to sort of see that evolution over these coming months and quarters.
Absolutely. No, I'd be happy to come back in a couple months or what have you.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And I will see everyone on the next time, a brand new episode of Crypto Muay Thai Podcast. Thanks. See you soon.